But before we even jump into that, let me remind everybody that this is the virtual edition of a live event that's going to actually occur in Atlanta on during the Beyond School Hours conference from February 20th to February 23rd. And so if you haven't actually been to our live show, it's just as fun as the online webinar. Um, we interview some amazing people. We have some great talk. We have some cool interaction. And we have a lot of fun, especially at the Beyond School Hours Conference, which is one of the nation's top conferences that you can possibly go to at an affordable cost for professional development. So we're very, very excited for that. A couple of things about technology today. We are using the Adobe Connect platform. Therefore, you should see over on the left-hand side our beautiful faces and actions and smiles. Hopefully, you should be able to hear us as well through the headset. We are going to ask that all questions today be kind of addressed over in the chat area. We have Paula and Elizabeth with us who are monitoring that chat area. They're going to make sure that I address all questions. And if you would like to raise your hand, I see that Denise has her hand raised. If you have a specific question, Denise, please feel free to go ahead and put that question in the chat room and we'll address it. Or if anybody has their hand raised and wants us to address them specifically, we will do so because we don't want you to leave your hand up during the whole webinar. You get kind of tired. So with that beginning, let me jump into who our sponsor is. Today we are so excited that this webinar and the live talk show have been brought to you by a generous support from the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. The Mott Foundation has been very kind to us in making sure that we can make a difference in the field by interviewing amazing people who are doing amazing things and bringing that to you. So thank you to the Mott Foundation ahead of time for all their amazing support. All right, but enough about that. As we mentioned, my name is Shawn Petty. I am a White-Riley-Peterson Fellow, supported by Furman University and the Mott Foundation. My entire focus is to focus on after school and use non-traditional time to move the bar with kids. And as such, I have the great pleasure of interviewing amazing people like Anna, the founder and CEO of Team Up Mentoring in Monroe, Georgia. And so, Anna, welcome.
Thanks, Shawn. I'm glad to be here.
So I'm actually going to turn the time over to you here in just 1 second. But before I do that, I want to have our audience get a feeling for exactly who you are. So Anna, can you tell us a little bit about your history? Did you just wake up one day and decide to do a mentoring program, or how did you get into this business, and where did you come from?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Georgia and went to college at the University of Georgia, and as a junior at the University of Georgia, I was pre-vet, so I was a biological sciences major, nothing to do with mentoring or after-school programs. And I had started working with a group of kids in my community and fell head over heels in love with those kids. And the interesting thing about those kids were they were children from hard places that had been through a great deal of trauma, but had such a special spark about them, their little spirits. And I really wanted to do something to foster what I saw in them, their greatness and their potential. And so there was really a time when I was a junior in college that was a calling type of situation where I felt like I needed to change direction. So I graduated with a degree in biological sciences, but went a totally different direction. Spent about a year just working as a receptionist and an eye doctor while I did research on best practices for helping kids from trauma, and then founded Team Up Mentoring in 2006.
Wow, so that's crazy. You started on a veterinarian track, and you totally changed direction. Was that scary?
Oh, absolutely, that was scary. And a lot of people thought, that I was making a mistake. They were sort of afraid for me, and how was this going to go, and what was this path going to look like? It was totally walking into the unknown. Um, but it turned out great.
Well, I love how you said that. So, like, did people try to convince you to do otherwise? Like, don't do this. Stay on the course around veterinarian science and stay in that pathway. Um, or were people like, wow, this is hard, but kudos, go for it.
Yeah. There was some of both. And I think all of it came from a good place of, concern and love for me and wanting to make sure I was okay and successful. So there were some people who, were very supportive, and that's what got me through those transitions into a totally different path. And then there were other people, who were very concerned about, but what will you do to live, and how will you support yourself? Along the way, there were things that I had to let go of and give up to make this dream a reality. And one of those was about 6 years in when I owned a house, and I gave it up to do this work full time and continue with it. And so that was another, sort of critical turning point for me and for this program. But again, there were those people that, we know this is hard and it doesn't make sense on paper, but we're supportive and we know you can do it.
That's amazing. So you told me the story when we were having our preliminary interview, and I just remember being dumbfounded, like my mouth kind of just fell down to the floor. You gave up a house, like you owned a house, and you gave up financially that house to keep this dream alive. And you did that because you feel this is a calling, like to build team up mentoring and to work with these kids and to help the spark grow. You really do feel this is a calling. Is that correct?
That's right, absolutely. And the situation I was in is I was working a job that paid the bills. I was teaching, and then I was also developing this program and working with about 30 kids at the time. And I came to a crossroads situation where I just knew that if I did not step out further in faith and do the full-time work that this really required, that it wasn't going to go anywhere. And I couldn't do that if I was tied down with these financial responsibilities of owning a home. And those kids were more important to me than the house that I had. And so I decided to give it up. And I am a person of faith, and my faith is what got me through that that time and the supportive people that were around me at that time.
Gosh, I could just imagine. I bet there were some days when you were like, when you're wondering how to pay the bills and how to make things work and keep the organization alive. I bet there are days that you really called upon that and came back to that calling and that vision of what you're doing. So,
Absolutely. And the children that were around me at that time were such an integral part of that, because I saw how they were growing and developing, and I saw the power of mentoring in this holistic model. And I couldn't give up on them.
oh, that is so cool. Now let me ask you: has it gotten easier, or is it still just an amazing struggle every day that Uh, so would you say like you got to a point where it's like, okay, we're established, things are rolling, everything's good, or has it been constantly like, gosh, I have to hit the pavement every day finding the next resource to keep this organization alive?
Um, in some ways, it's gotten easier. We are much more established now. For about the first 10 years of Team Up, I was the only staff member. And for the first 5 or 6 years of that, I was a volunteer staff member. Um, and so we've grown tremendously through, the last probably 3 or 4 years. And so we have different people on staff. We have an amazing board of directors that's so supportive. And so I feel like we're much more established now. But, in the world of nonprofits, in the world of caring for children, I don't think you ever get to a point where you think, oh, I can relax now. Everything is in place. There's always a new challenge, and that's part of what is attractive about this kind of work is, there are challenges. And I think, when you're doing holistic work with kids, the needs can be so different from child to child. So you are still, in a way, always chasing resources because you're trying to find that right resource for that one kid that needs it.
So it's interesting. You've said the word holistic quite a bit over in the just past 5 minutes. I'm assuming that has something to do with your mission and your vision and what Team Up's all about. Can you share a little bit about that and go ahead and tell us, like, what is, you've had this hardship building this organization, but what does this organization do? What is the holistic approach?
Absolutely. Well, if you look at our mission statement, we exist to connect the key elements of a child's life to foster growth and success. And so it goes back to that word holistic again, that we want to be, sort of the spoke, not the spokes, but the center of the wheel. And so everything that encompasses part of that child's life, so whether that's school, home, healthcare, transportation, extracurricular activities, therapy, we want to be the connecting point for that. And we want to foster growth and success. And we do that in a couple of ways that make us unique. So one of those is building long-term relationships. We serve kids age 3 to 21. And once you're in our program...
Did you say 21? Like you go all the way to 21?
Yes. So
Seriously?
you come into Team Up when you're, between pre-K and second grade, and then we become family with our kids and their families, and we stay with them until they turn 21.
That's amazing. I mean, my parents didn't even stay with me till I was 21. It was 18, and they're like, you're out of this house, buddy. So that's,
good luck.
So that's awesome. So from the age of 3 all the way to 21, and it's holistic, meaning it's everything.
Yes, it's absolutely everything. We're very collaborative with, all of the service providers that would be in a child's life, and connecting all of that back to the home to make sure parents are truly informed about everything in their kid's life. And then, of course, we provide resources and skills, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But how it works is we are looking for kids who have been through a great deal of trauma. And so we use something called adverse childhood experiences to measure that. And you can see the different adverse childhood experiences that we look for. Adverse childhood experiences is a CDC produced tool, ACEs. So this came out originally in like the late 90s. But we know from research that the more ACEs that you have before your 18th birthday, the more likely you are to struggle long term with, life goals, and also your physical and mental health. So people with an ACE score of 4 are 200% more likely to have a stroke than someone else just on the street with a lower ACE score. And so we work with a specific kind of child. So there's, a score of 1 to 10 on the ACE score scale. 4 is kind of a tipping point where your risk goes way up if you have a score of 4 or more. But Team Up concentrates on kids who have a score of 7 or more. So we're really working with a very unique population.
So that's amazing. So I want to recap a couple of things that you just said. So what you're saying is if you have an ACEs score of 4, not only is it affecting your mental state of mind, your mental health, but it's affecting your physical health as well. Like you have that chance of a stroke. And your organization works with kids who have a 7. What percentage is that of the country? That must be a small percentage, right? I hope.
It is. So our kids are part of the top 1% of the population in the United States. So 99% of people living in the U.S. right now have a score lower than a Team Up kid.
Wow. So you really are targeting kids who are just in desperate need of help. And I've heard you
Absolutely.
say, you've shared with me, some of your kids actually are higher than a 7.
That's right. We have several students we work with who have a score of 10.
10. That's
Hmm.
everything.
Yes,
That's
everything.
everything on that list that you just showed. They're struggling.
Hmm.
And you work with, wow, that's amazing. I do see we do have a person in the audience named Marina. She has her hand up. So Marina, if you have a question, feel free to ask that in the chat room. But we have a question that did pop up in the chat room. I want to go ahead and bring that into this conversation because we have talked in the past couple of shows about ACEs, and we've been dealing with trauma-informed care. It's something that we're trying to introduce into the after school to focus on in the non-traditional school time. Some of the organizations we work with aren't quite as holistic or well-rounded as your organization, and a lot of us definitely don't work with. Sometimes we do work with students above a 7 score, but not it's not our focus like yours. But the question is, are resiliency or protective factors measured in addition to ACE scores?
They are. So our intake process measures what protective factors are present for children as well. We actually divide kids into 3 tiers of service based on their ACE score and then based on their protective factors. So the higher your ACE score and the lower your protective factors, the higher tier of service that you're on.
Okay, so you have a tiered, so the protective factor kind of helps determine that, well, with the ACE score as well. So that makes sense.
That's right, because protective factors we know mitigate the risk of your high ACE score, and so the higher those resources are, those factors, it really does a lot to mitigate the risk. And then also some of our programs contribute to those protective factors because a caring adult, like a mentor through our program, is a protective factor in and of itself.
Okay, and can it be a caring adult that's not necessarily related to the child, or like can it be
Absolutely.
anybody who cares?
Right,
Okay,
absolutely. So a significant relationship with a caring adult is a protective factor. That could be a teacher, that could be an after school worker that they see on a regular basis, that could be a member of their extended family, it could be someone in their community of faith, it really could be anyone.
wow. And if we can help these kids and be those protective factors, we can help them not only on their mental health but on their physical health.
Right, absolutely.
Interesting. So why focus on the top of the ACEs tier? Like why focus on that? Why not from a 4 and on? Why from a 7?
Um, Well, that's interesting that you asked because we are actually going to be lowering our ACE score for entry to a 4
Oh,
because that's what the data um, shows is that really the risk is so much more from a score of 4 upward.
okay.
But the score of 7 is really came from who we were being presented with. Who were we getting referrals from? And these were students that a lot of other organizations felt like they couldn't help. They didn't have the resources to meet the plethora of needs that these children had. And we want to be the kind of folks that hey, you may not have been able to get what you needed somewhere else, but we can be that support system, that kind of bottom net. So if you've fallen through some other nets, we can still catch you.
That's awesome. I know on your next slide you highlight that a little bit about the being the 1%. Would you say that makes your organization really unique?
It does. And so that is one of the things that makes us very unique, that we're serving that top 1% most exposed to trauma kids in the U.S. And then we also are unique because of our approach. So we are holistic, and our logo talks about how we do that holistic work. So if you start at the top left, we are all about personal empowerment, and so putting kids in the driver's seat of their growth and development. We also do a lot of work around academics. All of our graduates have been first-generation high school graduates, and so we're really proud of them, and we encourage them to keep going in their education as well. The bottom right corner, the green, is all about wellness. And so we make sure that kids get to medical appointments, that they receive dental care and mental health care. And then the bottom left is all about relationships. And so the mentoring program that we have, the case management, just those relationship building activities and bonding with these kids over a long period of time. All of those parts go in to make us really unique as an organization. And then the final thing that makes us unique is the team of people that we have around those kids and how long that team stays in place. So once you become a Team Up Kid, you are given a whole team of people that really tick all 4 quadrants of our logo that we just talked about. So there's mentors, there's tutors, there's counselors, there's therapists. If you need transportation to appointments, we can help you with that. And the faith community, of course, is an important part of the volunteer base and also the connections with services in the community. And then we're with you over time. Kids who've been through a lot of trauma, we know have a heightened fear and sense of abandonment and rejection. And so we counter that by being a consistent presence over their entire development.
Gosh, it truly is a team then. I mean, that's amazing that each child has that team. Any thoughts? So you're a really unique organization that does that. I know we're gonna chat in just a second about a couple of stories, but before we jump into that, how do you find the funding for this? May I ask that, just because I know a lot of our participants on the webinar today are after-school programs that are struggling every single day to find funding, and we don't take that necessarily holistic approach, and definitely not till 21. Maybe a few of us do, but like organizations that I ran in Texas, it's high school, and then when they're out of high school, it's like, see ya. And you stay with them, and you really work with them. And I bet some of the bonds, like you said, you become their family almost, or you become greater than family. You're truly that person's team for support. So how do you find the resources to do this?
Yeah. Well, we have some amazing volunteers, and our volunteers tend to stay with us over a long period of time. So the average Team Up volunteer stays with us 4 years.
Really?
Which is absolutely insane when you look at the numbers for other mentoring organizations. Just the longevity of those relationships. And I think that goes back to our model, and the training and the relationships that are built become really powerful for the mentor as well as the child. And so we could not do this without our volunteers. We have about 50 volunteers a year that work with our organization. And if we had to, replace those with paid individuals, we couldn't do it. We have incredible community support. So this started as a grassroots organization, and that's still where the majority of our funding comes from, is from individuals and businesses and groups that sponsor kids to be in this program. And then, of course, there's grant funding. So one of the things that I didn't necessarily connect immediately was that trauma survivors and victims of crime have a huge overlap. A lot of those trauma experiences that we looked at with the ACE list, like witnessing domestic violence or being a victim of abuse, those are crimes against children. And so we have funding in place from VOCA, Victim of Crime Grant, that helps pay for services for kids. Um, but primarily, it is that grassroots effort of connecting with different organizations in our community to do free work or reduced cost work on behalf of these kids.
That's amazing. I mean, being able to get those resources and get those volunteers and to have volunteers stay with you for 4 years, you are right. When the average volunteer is less than a year, to have them for 4 years, that's 400% the national average. So, uh, kudos to you. Any tips to some of the people listening on how we can encourage or implement elements of what you're doing into like after school or into our community organizations? Any tips on where we can go to learn more and to kind of mimic some of the work that you're doing?
As far as funding?
Funding or actual services. I mean, it's hard to, like, a mentor is different than a tutor,
Right.
and a mentor is not a therapist, so how do you, any tips on how to get some ideas of teams like this started and to focus maybe, a little bit broader than what our organizations are doing?
Yeah. So as far as mentors go, a great place to find those are in the faith community and
Okay.
also in local high schools. And so we do a lot of work with service clubs at local high schools to find mentors who can go into, our program, but could also easily go into an after-school program to mentor kids.
Do you
Um,
have success with that? Like high school students, do they really want to do service?
Yeah, they do. We always pair them with, very young children, so, fifth grade or down.
Okay.
And then we have a training process that, really gets them ready to serve. So there's a year-long training schedule that every mentor participates in. Some of those are in-person trainings where we talk through situations they might encounter with kids and how to handle those. We make sure that they have a lot of support. So there are other mentoring models that pair somebody with a kid, and then it's up to that person to meet with the child somewhere in the community on their own time. We've found that that model isn't effective for this population because there's so many things that could happen that the mentor might not be prepared for in that one-on-one setting with no support. And so all of our kids meet with their mentors at the same time, on the same day, in the same location, and then they have staff that is right there to help them troubleshoot. I think that makes our mentors a lot more comfortable.
I like that, and that is a mentoring best practice is to have consistency and accountability on the mentor as well, so that's great. We have a question from Donna in the chat room. She's curious, how do you identify the children who need this special attention? She's specifically thinking about like the youngest children, like the 3-year-olds. How do you identify a 3-year-old? My mind is blown that a 3-year-old could be on the ACEs scale, but obviously they are. And so how do you identify them so that they can get started with a team?
Yeah, so we work off of a referral process. We get referrals from our local school system, usually through the counselors.
Okay.
And then we also get referrals from DFACs, so kids who have been in foster care but are now reunited with their parents. And so we serve almost as, aftercare support for that family. And then the bulk of our referrals, though, are actually self-referrals. And so we have been in this community now, we're in our 13th year, and we have built, these trust bond relationships with families that we've served over time. And to the point where then when they see a neighbor of theirs struggling, or they see an extended family member, their family struggling, that they will give our information to them. And so it's not unusual for a family to call us and to say and disclose, this is what's been happening with my family and my child. And so that's how we identify, especially those young kids, is there's a referral process that somebody can speak on their behalf and say, this is what this child has been through.
Thank you. That's interesting. Hopefully that kind of addressed Donna's question. I know Donna's probably thinking, of bringing that in with some of the work she does as well. So we had another question. She says, thank you, by the way. Katie online says, and she's jumping over to the mentor side. And this is actually a question that I'd thought of as you were speaking about mentors, but was hoping somebody asked, so I'm glad she asked. She says, how do you screen the mentors to ensure that they're really benefiting the child versus causing more harm? In today's world, sometimes the best intentioned individual sometimes can cause harm. So how do you screen them to make sure they're totally on the up and up? And also in that training, how do you focus on that?
Sure. And I do want to say one more thing about the last question. There's an excellent resource for helping a parent talk about what their children have been through on a website called the Center for Youth Wellness. It's Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris's site, and she has a lovely quick screening tool that an after-school program could provide as a part of their intake packet that doesn't require too much disclosure, but that would give you an idea of kids that might be at special risk. And then on the mentor side, our screening process starts with an application, criminal background check, references, and an interview, so that we're looking for, of course, any history of child maltreatment or any other offenses that would, preclude somebody from working with children. And then I think our training process is key to making sure that no harm is caused. So we use best practice training from the National Mentor Network, and to ensure that people know not only what our values and mission are and how we live those out, but also have practical on the ground training for modeling those behaviors and responses that we want from mentors when they get into difficult situations, and also the strong staff support so that they can get help as they need it.
Interesting. And is Denise is following up on some of that question. And so is Team Up kind of an inpatient program? Or are you going out to schools and homes of these youth?
So kids that are served through Team Up, they live at home with their families. And it's a combination of them coming to us for services and then us going out into the community to provide services. So the mentoring program and the tutoring that we do, they are coming to us for those services. And then we are connecting them with community services around therapy and counseling, medical care in the community. We often provide transportation to those services and serve as a collateral contact to help parents stay in the loop with, paperwork or follow-up recommendations for their kids. And then we also do a lot of in-home work with the family. So our case management services are very home-driven. So we go out to the home and visit with parents, solve problems, just be a listening ear and support for that parent who may be experiencing a lot of toxic stress themselves. And then always with the idea of being supportive and then also connecting them to community resources that they may not know about, or they may have barriers that have stopped them from using those in the past.
That's interesting. It sounds like your teams that work with these students, while they are focused on, or not students, excuse me, youth, while they're focusing on these children, they're impacting more than just that child. They're impacting, it sounds like, the child's family and the individuals that child interacts with. Have you ever had a situation where, like, sometimes I've worked with kids who just don't want to be helped?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do?
Yeah, I think that having the family support is key. And since we have so many families who self-refer, A lot of that barrier is overcome in the first step of the process. So, our program is not something that's, mandated by the courts for kids to participate in. Nobody is making them do it. Even a DFACS recommendation, they're not forced to choose us as a provider. They're making that choice. And so parents are really helpful for, times when kids may, not want to do something or not want to participate. But really the overwhelming response we've had is when they have these relationships with our staff and volunteers that are just theirs, and they have that special one-on-one attention with a caring adult. There are very few children that will not just eat that up. And that positive attention and that caring they really respond to. We do find that there are times that it takes time for that
Yeah.
connection to spark, and kids are, sometimes reticent to kind of grab on to that person. But once that connection is made, and we've provided the support for that connection, it's a beautiful thing to watch that kid blossom into that relationship.
And so I can only imagine the stories that you must have. You could probably write a book. Matter of fact, you probably should. You should write a book about some of these stories, and share. So can you share like an experience you've had with the youth, and kind of
Yeah,
tell us a story?
yeah, sure. Well, I want to walk you through actually the story of one of our kids.
Oh,
I'm
look
going
at
to call
her.
her Jane, and this is not a true photo of her for privacy reasons. But Jane came to us at about this age. She was 6 when she started at Team Up, and Jane is one of those kids who had an ACE score of 10. And so
Of
Jane
10.
had, yes, she's a 10. And so she had experienced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse already as a little first grader. She had been neglected physically and emotionally. She was actually functioning as a caregiver for a disabled parent when we met her. And so it was her primary job as a 6-year-old to help that parent bathe, dress, get meals. Just had a ton of responsibility that shouldn't have been hers at that
As a
age
6-year-old.
as a 6-year-old. Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
And then, there was a lot of dysfunction in Jane's household. So there were, people that she lived with who were mentally ill, severely so. There had been people who were incarcerated. Her mom had been a victim of domestic violence. Several people in her household used illegal drugs and alcohol. And then, the 10th one is divorce, but it also just talks about the loss of a parent. And Jane didn't have a relationship with her dad. So she did have that score of 10 out of 10 on the ACEs score, which is an astronomically low part of the
Yeah.
population that she identified with. Um, and so, of course, Jane was, very withdrawn when she came into Team Up. It took us about a year and a half before she offered to hug one of our staff. She was just that scared and that distrusting of other people. But we stayed with her, and her little 2 feet grin was something we just lived to see. As she became more comfortable with us. Um, and so, um, even though she had been through all of these hard things that early, she was such a beautiful little spirit about her. And Team Up became her family. We supported her as make sure she went to doctor and dentist appointments. When she got older, she was paired with a counselor to help her work through some of the trauma she'd been through. She became homeless a couple of times over her childhood, and Team Up was there to connect her family with resources like shelters and rehousing programs. And Jane became successful. It was a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of just being part of, very painful parts of her journey and being present for those and fully present for those. But she kept going, and so we kept going with her. She was the first person in her family to finish the 9th grade. I'm going to say that again. She was the first person in her family to finish the 9th grade. The 3 generations previous to her had never gotten that far in school. And when she was in high school, when she went to 9th grade, she started to struggle academically, and we realized that she had an incredibly long day every day. She was still taking care of her mom, that disabled parent whose situation medically had become worse over time, so there was even more care that was needed. She had a younger sibling that she was taking care of, and so by the time she mothered everyone in her life and made sure they were okay and just went to school, it was about a 13-hour workday.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah,
I
and so
take
no
care
time
of.
for algebra,
I was gonna say I have 2 kids, and I go to work every day, and then I come home. I take care of my two girls, and I'm exhausted. I can't imagine if I was going to high school and had the type of things. That's amazing. And so you guys just stayed with her and
We
helped her
did.
get through that academic slump.
Right, we did. And her team met and decided that it would be best to send her to a private school where she only had to go to class 1 day a week, and provide her with a private tutor to help her, so that she would just have a little more flexibility in her daily schedule, and could
Okay.
hopefully get a nap in the afternoon while her
Yeah,
younger
really.
sibling was at school. And so she really blossomed through that. She worked very hard, and she became the first graduate in her family from high school, and she's working now. So we're really,
Wow.
really proud of her.
So made it through 3. So 3 generations didn't make it to 9th grade. She made it, but then she went on and graduated high school. And did you stay with her
Oh, yes,
after that?
absolutely, yes. We're actually still working with her now. She's 20 years old now, and so she has 1 more year left with our program. Of course, we love her to death. She's family. We've known her since she was 6 years old, so we'll still have some contact, but she's still receiving services from us about, really just how to adult as a 20-year-old and, in the workforce now, making that transition from student to working adult.
I was going to say, she's kind of been an adult all her life. She's had trauma. She's taken care of her mom, her siblings. She's had to deal with those issues and school and everything else. Is she unique for your program, or is this a consistent success story?
It is a consistent success story. So our graduation rate from high school is 100%. We've had
Wait,
that for the last
one
3 years.
100%.
Yes,
You're
100%.
not joking.
No, if
Eh,
you are a team up kid, you will graduate from high school.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow.
And they're
A
all
lot of
first
schools could.
generation grads. All first
Wow,
generation grads.
that's awesome. And so, what's this other stat here?
Yes, and so of those graduates in the last 3 years, from 2015 to 2018, 88% of those are in the workforce. So, they may have graduated 3 years ago, but they are still working. And so we track that data long term. So we're not just talking, 6 months out of our program, they have a job, but
Sure.
they're working and working consistently.
That's amazing. I mean, I could just think what you just basically told me is that you have tremendous return on investment from what you've invested in this youth to what that youth is now investing in society.
Absolutely.
If you, I'm sitting here, I'm like, that's a business case. You should be totally funded even further. But we'll talk about that later. So, wow. Okay, so, and I know you're going to recap a little bit on the next slide about Jane's success story.
Yes.
just to hit those points again, I believe.
Yeah. So just to recap. So she started at age 6 with a score of 10. She's the first person in 3 generations to finish the ninth grade, and the first person in her family to graduate from high school. And the beautiful thing is that her story is not unusual for Team Up Kids.
Wow. So we have a question in the chat room from Meg, Meg Maynard. She says, how do you track the progress and stay in touch with the youth you serve? You know, that's one of our challenges in our field is keeping track. How do you do it?
Well, keeping track of the progress, we do that through a case management system. We use an online one called Apricot, and a lot of color-coded calendars in Google Calendar. Those are our friend. So just, keeping track of, all of the places that we need to be with kids and how many services they've received. Every child in our program has a plan, a case management plan that they set annually with goals that they're working towards for that year and progress towards those. And then as far as staying in touch, that's really an on-the-ground process. We serve a population that is termed in a lot of different areas hard to serve. So these are families who move a lot. Their phones are disconnected a lot and they get new phone numbers. So our home visits are essential for being able to keep up with those kids. So we are in everybody's home that we serve at least once a week. And so we really, keep our fingers on the pulse of what's happening in that kid's life.
That's cool. I know you mentioned Apricot is your case management software.
Yes.
I've worked with Apricot. They're very good to nonprofits.
Absolutely.
So I put a link in the thing, so thank you. Let me ask you, we have about 12 minutes before we have to close out, and I know we'll probably have tons of questions coming in as well, so I look forward to that. But where are you going? Like, you're already, it seems like, wow, you're so successful already. Like, you're working with these kids, you're changing the world, one child at a time, but yet the impact is affecting many. Where to now? Or have you reached the pinnacle?
Oh, absolutely not. We have not reached the pinnacle. There is still a ton of things to do. And for us, the next few things that we're looking at, our organization just completed a strategic plan process last year in 2018. I strongly recommend that any organization that serves kids, whether they're an after-school program or a program like ours, it's a little more holistic, to really think about where are you going and where do you want to go. And a strategic plan process is a great way to do that. You can do them as simply or as elaborately as you'd like. But the bottom line is, taking some time to step back and look at, where do we want this thing to go? And where is the best places to go so that we serve kids most effectively? So for us, what we're looking at is a new program for 18 to 21-year-olds that includes housing and internship opportunities. And I'm really excited about this one. So right now, 18 to 21-year-olds are primarily served through case management. So they still have a case manager that checks in with them and helps them troubleshoot. But we would love to be able to give kids a springboard from high school into the world of college, workforce, university, whatever they choose, that's super supportive. And one of the major barriers for our kids to overcome is housing. Where do they go and how do they become independent in a way that's healthy and supported? So we'd love to be able to provide housing for those young people. And then internships. So, that first full-time employment that they have. And not just, any old job, but something that is really supportive and aligns with their interests. So we're looking at, what does that look like in the future for us? Another thing we're doing is expanding our wellness initiatives. That's where we're going next. So we talked a little bit about those increased health risks associated with high ACE scores. And we really want to look at, beyond making sure kids get that routine medical care, and beyond making sure that they have opportunities to be active, what else can we do to make those wellness initiatives very well-rounded and speaking to their needs? And then the last thing we're doing is working on program replication. We actually are helping a pilot program out in White River, Arizona. We'll be involved in that in 2019 and 2020, getting a pilot program running. But what does it look like for us to replicate our model into other communities? We're the only organization like us in the state of Georgia. We'd love to change that. And there's only 3 organizations like us nationally that we know of. And we'd love to see that change. And, not creating more team-ups, but lending our model to other communities for them to tailor to the needs of their population, and getting more kids like Jane that we talked about, the services that they need to grow up well.
I love it. I'm all like, Rhonda Lauer, who's the head of Foundations Inc., who is that organization that's putting this webinar together. She's on the line, and she wrote in the chat room, "What amazing work you're doing." I'm like, Rhonda, we should take Anna and our other guests and do a road show and like go around and talk to people and try to replicate this work, because it's amazing. We do have a question to build upon what you're talking about too. Is there a limit to the number of youth you can serve since you're so hands-on? And do you have a wait list?
Yes. So the answer to both of those are yes. Right now we serve 62 young people in our program. We're going to increase that number to 75 in the fall because we hired an additional staff person. And so we will cap out at 75. We typically have a wait list going of between 5 and 10 young people waiting to get into the program. So I'm really excited about this new hire that we made that's going to allow us to empty off that waiting list that we have right now. But yeah, the need is really great where we are for this kind of service. And these are kids that qualify for the program, so they're on the wait list, but we already know that they have the ACE score that we're looking for entry.
Well, I mean, it's amazing. And I love the vision of where you're going. The idea, the new program for 18 to 20-year-olds, the housing and internship opportunities. What a great strategic plan. Do you think that'll be implemented in the next, 2 to 3 years, or is it long term?
So this is what we're thinking for the next 3 years out.
Okay, next 3 years out, and then the expanding the wellness initiatives. So we have a question in the chat room too that's kind of leading us into our closing thoughts as well. So I'll kind of ask this, and then I'll ask you for some final thoughts or final words here, because we're down to 6 minutes to close out. We have a question from Tayana, and it says, how do you think the field that you've joined, so not necessarily the organization that you have, but the entire field of youth development / holistic care, working on trauma-informed care through mentoring and the team approach, how do you really think that helps the future of all children or children in the future? Like, where's the field going?
Yeah.
It's a tough question.
It is, and my brain is sort of going in a lot of different directions with an answer, but I think the most important thing to remember about helping the future of all children and being in this field of trauma-informed care really is, the final word that I had for you guys today. And I think that, trauma-informed care is so important because the effects of trauma can be invisible. And so we can really miss some kids that really need our help if we're not careful. And those kids grow up and they have kids. And the effects of trauma can be seen generation after generation after generation. And so it's a, we are upstream from those generations to come with the little guys and girls that we are entrusted with now. And it's super important for us to remember in this field that even though the effects of that trauma and knowing, how pervasive trauma is in our world can be overwhelming, that it really only takes the individual to make a difference in that. You don't have to have a program like Team Up Mentoring to make a difference in a child's life today that's going to affect how they raise their children 20 years from now. And the thought for the day was from Susan Hopkins. Your positive supportive presence is one of the most significant influences on a student's day. And if you consistently make that positive effort and be that presence for kids, you affect not only their lives today, but their future children, the kids that are going to be in their lives when they become adults, and even further down. So, there are a lot of strategies that we can use as people in this field to help kids and be there for kids. But really, you are the strategy. Your presence as a supportive and caring adult is the strategy, not only for that little kid in your after school program or that you run into in the halls at school or at the ball field, but for their kids and their families in the future.
Wow. What a powerful final word. Thank you. I love that. You are the strategy. You're absolutely right. And so it has been an amazing 58 minutes of chatting with you about Team Up Mentoring, your approach, where you're going in the future. Love to have you back on the show in like a year or so and find out, is it happening? Are you moving forward? So would love to keep in touch and learn more. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome,
Not just
and I
for
appreciate you taking the time.
No, well, thank you so much. Not just for doing the webinar today, but for the work you do, for giving up a home, for giving your all to kids. I mean, you're breaking generational poverty, which, Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday's coming up, his celebration, and his big vision towards the end of his life was to break or end poverty. And I think the work that you're doing is helping with youth and others who have gone through such experiences that sometimes we can't even envision them. And you're helping break that chain and make a difference. You are what I call, for all my guests on the show, I call you a warrior of light, because you are breaking the darkness that's out there in the world and shining light. So thank you so much for all that you do. It's amazing. And thank you to everybody who joined us. We've lost a couple of people in the last 5 minutes or so, but we had a really strong group. They were sharing a lot. Rhonda, thank you for joining us and for chiming in. Thank you just everybody who was here. We have a lot of organizations who are thanking you, Anna, for the work that you do. And we're going to take our learnings from what you're doing, and we're going to go ahead and expand on them in the field of after school and youth development. We'll continue doing that. So without further ado, I just want to say thank you one more time to the Charles S. Mott Foundation for supporting this talk show series. We hope that everybody will join us at the Beyond School Hours Conference in Atlanta this year, February 20th through the 23rd. Please don't forget about the live talk show where we'll be interviewing and chatting with Jacqueline Santiago, Ruby Sullivan, and Professor Laley, who was our first guest on the show this year, and a surprise guest that will be joining us. So that's going to be an exciting time. And I think I am at a close. So Elizabeth, I turn the time back to you.
Thank you both, Shawn and Anna. We really appreciate that you've taken out the time from your busy schedules to be with us today. We want to thank the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation again for supporting this webinar series. And we want to thank you for joining us for Perspectives from the Field Talk Show Virtual Edition. And we'd like you to take a moment to fill out a survey for today's talk show. There's a link provided below. If you'd like to learn more, we hope you'll join us for the Beyond School Hours Conference, February 20th through 23rd in Atlanta, Georgia. The Perspectives from the Field talk show will be featured on Friday, February 22nd. Shawn and his special guests will continue this conversation about supporting children who've experienced trauma. There's a link to register for the conference provided in the box to the left. You can also access any of our previous talk shows by clicking the link called Perspectives Archive. Thanks again for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you in Atlanta.